There are places in the world where people go for adventure, inspiration, or to find themselves. But sometimes these journeys end in unexplained disappearances that defy logic and common sense. Today you will learn about two such mysterious cases. One took place in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where conservationist Bruno Manser, a man whose life was dedicated to fighting to preserve the rainforest, disappeared. The other was in the quiet forests of Washington state, where the trail of traveler Leah Roberts ended as abruptly as her adventure began. These stories are filled with strange circumstances, conflicting clues, and questions that no one has yet found answers to. They continue to unsettle people's minds with their unknown and twisted plots, making us wonder again and again, what really happened? Born on August 25, 1954, in the Swiss city of Basel, Bruno Manser's childhood was one of great promise and privilege. He grew up in a wealthy family and was a bright, free-thinking boy. However, despite the fact that his parents expected a career in medicine, young Bruno chose a different path. At the age of 19, Bruno was sentenced to 3 months in prison for refusing compulsory military service in Switzerland. Inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's idea of nonviolence, he relished his status as a political prisoner and upon leaving prison wished to live a simple and contented life. From 1973 to 1983, he worked as a shepherd in the Swiss Alps, practicing crafts, herbalism, and speleology. He learned to make, fire, and lay his own bricks. He fashioned leather, raised bees, and even made his own clothes by weaving the wool of the sheep he tended, and for a long time this was enough to keep Bruno happy. But around the age of 30, he developed a deep and abiding thirst for travel. In 1984, Bruno visited the Malaysian state of Terengganu, where he joined an expedition to explore Gunung Mulu National Park. It was here that he first learned about the nomadic tribe known as the Panun. Bruno later said that he wanted to find the deeper essence of humanity in people who still lived close to their nature. So he set out to find this tribe. Not satisfied after the first failures and many subsequent attempts, Bruno finally found the nomadic Panan tribes in the upper Limbang River in May 1984. At first, the Panan tribesmen simply ignored him, being too wary of the crazy white man to approach him. After a while, however, the Panans were impressed by Bruno's resilience and, after proving that he had no ill intentions, eventually accepted him into their villages. During his time with the Panans, Bruno learned all sorts of jungle survival skills. He became familiar with the Penan culture, learned their language, and was even welcomed into the court of the chief of the Panan tribe, Chief Along Sega. Bruno wore a loincloth while hunting with the tribe's warriors, using a blowgun and poison darts to kill birds, primates, and even snakes. In Switzerland, Bruno was nicknamed Tarzan, and many said he had finally lost his mind. But among the Panans, he was known as Lucky Panan. Lucky Panan simply means Panan man. But make no mistake, it was the highest compliment they could pay him. It was almost an official induction into the tribe. He had survived malaria, a near-fatal snake bite, and had survived a fall from a mountain after hanging from a rope for just under a day. It is obvious that Bruno could have coped with the jungle, but even more perplexing is what happened to him next. By 2000, Bruno had been making long trips into the rainforests of Southeast Asia for more than 15 years. He was actively involved in the fight against deforestation in the region, but unfortunately made many enemies in the process. He was hated by logging companies. He was hated by those who needed cheap timber. And because of his high-profile corruption allegations, Malaysian politicians tried to ban him from entering their country. Bruno was forced to turn his sights to Indonesia. And in February 2000, he found himself on the jungle trails of Kalimantan. Bruno was accompanied by a film crew from his Bruno Manser Fund, as well as the organization's secretary, John Quensley. There he separated from Quenzi and the film crew and continued his journey with another unarmed companion. The journey lasted 2 weeks, crossing mountains and rivers on foot and by boat, with the only respite being a few hours of sleep in a canvas hammock. On May 18th, Bruno reached the border of Sarawak and Kalimantan. There, Bruno and his companion spent their last night writing a short message on a postcard to his girlfriend Charlotte, who had remained in Switzerland. Taking an oath that he would see to the delivery, Bruno gave the postcard to his companion, who later said that he looked perfectly happy and healthy when they parted. Afterward, Bruno went off into the jungle alone. According to John Quinsley, Bruno crossed the Sarawak-Kalimantan border on May 22nd. He was then spotted by a Pinyan friend, a man named Palyu. On May 25th, Palyu said Bruno was carrying a 30-kilogram backpack and was heading toward a mountain called Bukit Batu Lawi. Bruno told Palyu that he intended to climb the mountain, but when asked if he needed company or help, Bruno declined. Palyu wished him luck and said goodbye, but he did not know that this was the last time anyone would see Bruno alive. After Bruno did not return to the Foundation campground within the allotted time, John Quinsley and the film crew enlisted the help of Panan tribesmen to find him. They surveyed the area around the Limbang River and even tracked down Bruno's last campsite before his attempt to climb Batu Lawi. They followed Bruno's machete trail through dense forests until the trail reached a swamp at the foot of Bukit Batu Lawi. But unfortunately, there was no sign of him returning from the swamp, nor of anyone else who had come to the area. The Bruno Foundation paid for a search and rescue helicopter as well as a mountaineering team to traverse the limestone peaks of the mountain. However, citing extreme danger, none of the climbers wanted to tackle the last 100 meters of the steep limestone that forms the summit of Batu Loi. After the descent, the climbers concluded that if Bruno had attempted the limestone summit, it was very likely that some tragic accident would have befallen him. With this in mind, they made a second trip up Batu Loi, focusing on places where Bruno might have landed in the event of an unfortunate fall. However, mysteriously, no trace of Bruno's body, equipment, or clothing was found. The climbers enlisted the help of two very experienced local guides and asked for their opinion on where Bruno's body might have gone. They spent several days searching various nooks and crannies, but again, finding nothing, the local guides were extremely puzzled by their opinion. If Bruno was not in the places they predicted, they had to rule out a mountaineering accident as the cause of his disappearance. If Bruno had climbed the mountain, he must have come down alive. There was simply no other explanation for why he was gone, at least not a rational one. Upon learning of Bruno's disappearance, his friend Charlotte contacted the Foundation to inform them of the important event. In the last postcard he had written to her before climbing the mountains, Bruno complained of diarrhea and a broken rib. He also complained of extreme fatigue, but was determined to accomplish something he had forgotten to tell her about in the postcard. It seems that Bruno was searching for something that compelled him to venture alone into the jungles of Indonesia. But what if the object of Bruno's search was the very thing that made others search for him in turn? As the search became increasingly desperate, Bruno's distraught companions enlisted the help of psychics, soothsayers, and even tribal necromancers. In some cases, their predictions diverged dramatically, but they all agreed on one thing: Bruno was alive. Encouraged by the supposedly supernatural insight of their consultant, the Bruno Foundation asked the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs to launch an official investigation into his disappearance. They agreed, and another search party set out into the jungle in hopes of bringing Bruno home. But this time, too, despite the huge amount of money and man-hours spent on the search, their efforts were fruitless, and they returned empty-handed. In November 2001, Bruno was honored with an award from the International Society for Human Rights. This award should have meant a lot to a man who had dedicated his life to defending the rights of indigenous peoples. Just a few months later, however, he was presented with an award that he may have considered even more significant. In January 2002, hundreds of Panan tribal members gathered for a funeral ceremony known as Atawai. They paid tribute to the missing Bruno Manser, celebrating his life and courage, and then said goodbye to his eternal spirit. The tribal leaders called him Lakitawang, or the one who was lost, as saying the names of the recently deceased is a great taboo in Panasian culture. After subsequent expeditions failed to find any trace of Bruno, a civil court in Basostat declared him legally dead on March 10, 2005. 5 years later, to mark the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, a memorial service was held at the Elizabethan Church in Basel. It was attended by about 500 people. No one called him Tarzan anymore, and only a few addressed him as Bruno out of respect. He was Lucky Tawang, a man who lost his heart in the jungles of Southeast Asia and later lost his life. Leah Roberts was born on July 23, 1976, in Durham, North Carolina. She was described as a talkative, easygoing girl with a thick Carolina accent and a deep love of music. By the age of 23, Leah was leading a comfortable life in the town of Raleigh, North Carolina, with her longtime friend and roommate Nicole. But her young life was irreparably marred by tragedy. When she was just 17 years old, Leah's father was diagnosed with a long-term respiratory illness, and just 3 years later, her mother died, unexpectedly, of a heart condition. Leah took a leave of absence to recover from her deep and sudden grief, but when she returned in the fall of 1998, she was nearly killed in a horrific car accident. Her lung was punctured, her femur shattered, and she required a metal rod to be inserted along the length of the bone. In 1999, Leah's dying father passed away during the night. She subsequently withdrew again, which gave her time to help organize her father's upcoming funeral and divide his estate. But it was during this time, or perhaps as a result of the grief she experienced, that Leah became increasingly interested in philosophy and spirituality. Her passion for these topics continued to grow. Despite returning to college in the fall of '99, she spent much more time pursuing her new hobbies than earning her degree. She continued to get good grades and kept partying to a minimum. But then, just a few months before graduating from college, she dropped out. Her friends and family were shocked. But to Leah, it made perfect sense. She didn't need a degree. She wanted to travel. And if the previous few years had taught her anything, it was that you can't waste a minute. But unfortunately, Leah's newfound sense of wanderlust would ultimately be her undoing. On March 9, 2000, Leah and her sister Kara had a long phone conversation. They agreed to babysit the next day and then visit the homes of mutual friends the following days. Ironically, however, Leah never followed through on these promises. That same evening, she packed her bags, took her pet cat, Bia, and set off on a 5,000-kilometer solo road trip across the United States. The next day, when Leah didn't show up for her babysitter's appointment, Kara just assumed her sister had changed her mind. Leah was still processing the loss of her father, so the change of plans didn't cause her any hard feelings. It wasn't until March 13th that Kara realized something was wrong. That's when she went to her sister's apartment to check on her. Finding the front door unlocked, Kara began searching Leah's apartment. As she entered the bedroom, she found a notebook with the words, "Read me," scrawled on the cover. Kara took it, opened it, and found a handwritten note and $3,000 in cash. The note was addressed to her roommate, and it said it was to pay the bills while I was gone. It also said, "Remember, we are all together in thoughts and prayers, and time passes quickly. Believe in me for yourself. Help Shep at Easter at Lottie's house so the kids can have fun. Give Peter my laptop. Give everyone my love. See you soon. Tell Kara not to worry, although she will, per script Leah." Underneath the main text, Leah appears to have scribbled a few more messages on April 23rd. One of them read, "On the road." A second message read, "She'll understand." A third additional message gave her friend permission to stay in her room if she ever came to her town. Leah loved to read books, and one of her favorite authors was Jack Kerouac, and she had a special love for the work of Dharma Burns. According to a close friend, she especially loved the part where Kerouac spends the summer of 1956 as a firefighter on Desolation Peak in rural Washington state. Kara, who had obtained power of attorney for Leah, used it to get her sister's bank records. They showed that Leah was traveling to Washington through the Southwest and West Coast. She was repeating Kerouac's journey. Kara soon discovered that Leah had spent the night of March 10th in Lebanon, Tennessee, and had reached Brooks, Oregon by March 13th. 9 days later, two joggers jogging on a trail in Washington's Whatcom County made a strange discovery while advancing along the trail. While jogging, they noticed an item of clothing hanging from a tree. Further searching led to the discovery of a second article of clothing, after which their attention was drawn to a white vehicle that was parked at the foot of a roadside embankment with heavy damage. The vehicle was a 1993 Jeep Cherokee that was parked on the left side of Canyon Creek Road, just over 30 miles east of Bellingham. The exterior of the vehicle was heavily damaged, with windows shattered and the front of the Jeep crumpled, indicating a severe frontal collision. The ground around the Jeep was strewn with clothing and scattered personal items, including a guitar, passport, driver's license, checkbook, and several CDs. Several blankets had been thrown over the car's broken windows, suggesting someone had used it as a shelter from the elements. But when two concerned joggers shouted to the driver, they were met with only silence. The investigator who arrived on the scene estimated that the Jeep must have been traveling at about 100 kilometers per hour for it to have sustained such external damage. It also rolled over several times before coming to a stop in a thicket of fallen trees arranged vertically and parallel to the road. The investigator stated that anyone in the car at the time of such a crash would have been seriously injured, if not killed. However, detectives were unable to find any evidence that anyone was in the car at the time of the accident. No traces of hair or blood were found. The seatbelt had not been pulled, and there was no damage consistent with the head hitting the steering wheel or windshield. The driver seemed to have simply vanished behind the wheel of his vehicle. It soon became clear that the owner of the Jeep, reported missing a few days earlier, was none other than Leah Roberts. Surveillance footage from a Brooks gas station showed her looking out the window while the clerk paid her bill, as if concerned that she was being watched. But the veracity of that version was never established. In the days following the discovery of the Jeep, 2 search and rescue teams combed the area around it with dogs and a helicopter, but unfortunately, they found no trace of Leah or her missing pet cat. Search and rescue experts strongly doubted that Leah got lost and died in the woods because she could have been moderately to severely injured after the accident. But they also cited the lack of blood and seatbelts, and one officer even suggested that Leah had intentionally crashed the car while not driving to use it as a makeshift shelter. In his opinion, this was the worst possible scenario because he quite rightly assumed she was not in her right mind. "It doesn't surprise me that she might have gone off and tried to find herself," Leah's brother told Heath a few days after her disappearance. "I was worried about her, but I wasn't really concerned until we got the call that they found her car." A thorough search of the Jeep found $2,500 stuffed in her jeans and a wooden decorative box containing a ticket to the 2:10 p.m. showing of the movie American Beauty at the Bellis Fair Mall the day she arrived in Oregon. But what concerned Leah's family and friends the most was the discovery of her mother's wedding ring, which appeared to have been abandoned with her Jeep. Leah's loved ones knew that the ring was her most precious earthly possession, the one thing she treasured more than anything else in the world. If she thought she was leaving her Jeep and never coming back, those close to her had no doubt that Leah would take it with her. Its presence in the Jeep indicated that Leah intended to return to retrieve it. In that case, what prevented her from doing so? When Washington law enforcement put out a call for the public to come forward, there were several very credible allegations. An unidentified man told detectives that he and his wife had met a young woman matching Leah's description at a gas station in Everett, about 100 kilometers south of Bellingham. The man further reported that the woman seemed severely disoriented and made the rather disturbing statement that she didn't know who she was or where she lived. Naturally, the detectives believed that the man was trying to help and began asking him additional questions regarding this strange encounter. However, after demonstrating an inability to answer the questions, the man hung up and the detectives were unable to re-establish contact due to the nature of the anonymous line. This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of Leah's missing persons case. The detectives may well have been speaking to a man who was well aware of her whereabouts, but may have been deliberately trying to deceive them. On March 21, 2000, Leah's 2 siblings traveled to Washington State to help search for her. Their first destination was the Bellis Fair Mall, where Leah had gone to a screening of the movie American Beauty in the hope that someone in the audience would recognize her. None of the movie theater employees remembered her face, but at the Elephant and Castle restaurant, Employees said they spotted Leah at the bar on March 13th, chatting cheerfully with other customers. The day after the brothers returned to North Carolina, one of the men who had been socializing with Leah at the restaurant heard news of her disappearance and contacted detectives. The man, whose name has not been released, described her as very friendly and talkative, but he eventually saw her leave the restaurant alone. Detectives later tracked down another customer at the bar who also described Leah as warm and friendly. He also recalled talking to her about Jack Kerouac and how he was connected to her reasons for visiting Washington State. However, contrary to what the first witness said, a second visitor claimed that Leah left the restaurant with a man she identified as Barry. This man gave such a detailed description of Barry that authorities arranged for him to meet with an artist who created a composite drawing of the main figure in the case. However, detectives were never able to verify whether Barry even existed, and found it highly suspicious that the second bar patron's account directly contradicted that of the first. When pressed to identify inconsistencies between the two stories, the second customer's behavior became so bizarre that investigators began to question whether Barry was simply a fabrication designed to mislead them. After searching Leah's car, detectives asked Kara what she wanted them to do with the vehicle, and she told them to leave it behind, hoping that future technological advances would yield more clues. In 2006, her decision paid off. When detectives Jamie Collins and Alan Smith reviewed the case file, they realized that the Jeep had not been searched as thoroughly as they had previously thought. Although the interior had been processed for blood, hair, and fibers, it had not occurred to anyone to examine the hood of the vehicle for evidence. When they opened the hood, they found that a wire had been removed from the starter relay. This meant that someone could have turned on the ignition and then manually pressed the starter relay, which would have allowed the Jeep to drive itself down the embankment without the driver in the car. In addition, fingerprints of an unknown person were found under the hood of the vehicle. It appears that the Jeep had been broken into, and it would have taken someone with mechanical knowledge to manipulate the vehicle in this manner, Detective Smith said, knowing full well that his conclusion was opening up new and horrifying facets to the case. There was one person who was interested in such an experience, a man who said he saw Leah leaving with Barry. This man, who had moved to Canada by the time of the investigation, had previously served in the military and had extensive experience as an auto mechanic. It took 2 years to get fingerprints from Canadian authorities, but when they finally got them, they were disappointed to learn there was no match. Then, in the spring of 2010, authorities obtained a DNA sample from an undisclosed item in Leah's car. In 2011, they were going to compare that DNA to that of a person of interest, but the results of that test are still unknown. As of today, there is no update on the case. Leah's missing person posters, which were once plastered all over Washington State, are now weathered and frayed. That's it for now, folks. These mysterious disappearances leave more questions than answers, and remind us how unpredictable and mysterious our world is. If you were interested, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next episodes.